Alright, I am back. Now, I recorded chapter 3 and 4 for you last week, but apparently the video was too big, so we're going to start over and just do it chapter by chapter, so I may upload multiple videos at a time. Just watch them as you can. If you're really enjoying the story, binge them. Whatever you like. I just request that you also please do the work that we have provided for you. Ms. Rutherford and I are working very hard to make sure that you can still continue learning, just like as if we were in the classroom. So don't binge too much. But if you're enjoying the story and you have free time, then they're here for you if you like them. So, chapter 3. Now, if you remember, in chapter 2, the men and John D., is that right? John D. showed up, and Josh has encountered them, but now is Sophie's turn. So, stop watching me. I'm being watched. Okay. What was that disgusting smell? Sophie Newman was just about to press the Bluetooth headset back into her ear when she breathed deeply and paused, her nostrils flaring. She just smelled something awful. Closing her phone and pushing her headset into a pocket, she leaned over the open jar of dark tea leaves and inhaled. She'd been working in the coffee cup since she and her brother had arrived in San Francisco for the summer. It was an okay job, nothing special. Most of the customers were nice. A few were ignorant, and one or two were downright rude. But the hours were fine, the pay was good, the tips were better, and the shop had the added advantage of being just across the road from where her twin brother worked. They had turned 15 last December and had already started to save for their own car. They estimated it would take them at least 2 years if they had bought no CDs, DVDs, games, clothes, or shoes, which were Sophie's big weakness. Usually there were 2 other staff on duty with her, but one had gone home sick earlier, and Bernice, who owned the shop, had left after lunchtime rush to go to the wholesalers to stock up on fresh supplies of tea and coffee. She had promised to be back in an hour. Sophie knew it would take at least twice that. Over the summer, Sophie had grown up to the smells of the different exotic teas and coffee the shop sold. She could tell her Earl Grey from her Darjeeling and knew the difference between Javanese and Kenyan coffee. She enjoyed the smell of coffee, though she hated the bitter taste of it, but she loved tea. In the past couple weeks, she had been gradually sampling all the teas, particularly the herbal teas, with their fruity tastes and unusual aromas. But now something smelled foul and disgusting, almost like rotten eggs. Sophie bought a tin of loose leaf to her face and breathed deeply. The crisp odor of Assam caught at the back of her throat. The stench wasn't coming from there. You're supposed to drink it, not inhale it. Sophie turned as Perry Fleming came into the shop. Perry Fleming was a tall, elegant woman who could have been any age from 40 to 60. It was clear that she had once been beautiful, and she was still striking. Her eyes were the brightest, clearest green Sophie had ever seen, and for a long time she had wondered if the older woman wore colored contact lenses. Perry's hair had once been jet black, but now it was shot through with strands of silver, and she wore it in a tightly integrated braided ponytail that lay along her back almost to the base of her spine. Her teeth were small and perfect, and her face was traced with tiny laugh lines at the corner of her eyes. She was always much more elegantly dressed than her husband, and today she was wearing a mint-green sleeveless summer dress that matched her eyes, and what Sophie thought was probably pure silk. I just thought it smelled peculiar, Sophie said. She sniffed the tea again. Smells fine now, she added. But for a moment there, I thought it smelled like rotten eggs. She was looking at Perry Fleming as she spoke. She was startled when the woman's bright green eyes snapped wide open, and she whirled around to look across the street. Just as all the little square windows of the bookshop abruptly developed cracks, and 2 simply exploded into dust. Wisps of green and yellow smoke curled out into the street, and into the air was filled with the stench of rotten eggs. Sophie caught another smell, too, the sharper, cleaner smell of peppermint. The older woman's lips moved, and she whispered, "Oh, no, not now, not here." "Mrs. Fleming? Perry?" The woman rounded on Sophie. Her eyes were wild and terrified, and her usually faultless English now had a hint of foreign accent. "Stay here. Whatever happens, stay here and stay down." Sophie was opening her mouth to ask a question when she felt her ears pop. She swallowed hard, and then the door to the bookshop crashed open, and one of the big men Sophie had seen earlier was flung out into the street. Now he was missing his hat and glasses, and Sophie caught a glimpse of his dead-looking skin and his marble black eyes. He crouched in the middle of the street for a moment. Then he raised his hand to shield his face from the sunlight, and Sophie felt something cold and solid settle into the pit of her stomach. The skin on the man's hand was moving. It was slowly flowing, shifting viscously down into his sleeve. It looked as if his fingers were melting. A glob of what appeared to be gray mud spattered onto the street. Golems, Perry gasped. My God, he's created golems. Golems? Sophie asked, her mouth thick and dry, her tongue suddenly feeling far too large for her mouth. Golems from Lord of the Rings? Pierre was moving toward the door. No, golems, she said absently. Men of clay. The name meant nothing to Sophie, but she was watching with a mixture of horror and confusion as a creature, the golem, on the street, crawled out of the sun and under the covering of the awning. Like a huge slug, he left a wet, muddy trail behind him, which immediately dried into the fierce sun. Sophie caught another glimpse of his face before he staggered into the bookshop. His features had flowed like melted wax, and a fine web of cracks covered the skin, reminding her of the floor of a desert. Perry dashed out into the street. Sophie watched as the woman pulled her hair free of its intricate braid and shook it loose. But instead of lying flat against her back, her hair flowed out about her as if it were blown in a gentle breeze. Only there was no breeze. Sophie hesitated a moment. Then, grabbing a broom, she dashed across the road after Perry. Josh was in the bookstore. The bookshop was in chaos. The once neat shelves and carefully stacked tables were scattered and tossed about the room in heaps. Bookcases were shattered, shelves snapped in half, ornate prints and maps lay crushed on the floor. The stench of rot and decay hung about the room. Pulped paper and wood turned dry and rotting. Even the ceiling was scored and torn, plaster shredded to reveal the wooden joists and dangling electrical wires. The small gray man stood in the center of the floor. He was fastidiously brushing dust off the sleeve of his coat, while two of his golems explored the cellar. The third golem, damaged and stiff from exposure to the sun, leaned awkwardly against a crushed bookcase. Flakes of gray, mud-like skin were spiraling off what remained of his hands. The gray man turned as Perry, followed by Sophie, dashed into the bookshop. He gave a neat little bow. Ah, Madame Purnell, I was wondering where you were. Where is Nicholas? Perry demanded. She pronounced the name Nicola, and Sophie saw a static charge ripple down the woman's hair, blue and white sparks crackling. Downstairs, I believe. My creatures are looking for him. Clutching the broom tightly in both hands, Sophie slipped past Perry and crept around to the other side of the room. Josh. Where was Josh? She had no idea what was happening and didn't care. She just needed to find her brother. You're looking as lovely as ever, the gray man said, eyes fixed on Perry. You haven't aged a day. He bowed again, an old-fashioned courtly movement that he performed effortlessly. It is always a joy to see you. I wish I could say the same for you, Dee. Perry moved farther into the room, eyes darting from side to side. I recognized your foul stench. Dee closed his eyes and breathed deeply. I rather like the smell of brimstone. It is so, he paused, so dramatic. Then his gray eyes snapped open and the smile faded. We've come for the book, Purnell. And don't tell me you've destroyed it, he added. Your continued remarkable good health is proof indeed of its existence. Which book? Sophie wondered and glanced around the room. The shop was full of books. We are the guardians of the book, Perry said, and something in her voice made Sophie turn to look at her. The girl stopped, mouth and eyes wide with horror. A silver mist surrounded Perry Fleming, rising off her skin in gossamer threads, and translucent in places. It gathered thick and hard around her hands, making it look like she was wearing metal gauntlets. You will never get it, Perry snapped. We will, Dee said. We've accumulated all the other treasures of the years. Only the book remains. Now, make it easy on yourself and tell me where it is. Never. I knew you would say that, Dee said. And then the huge golem launched himself at Perry. Humans are so predictable. Nick Fleming and Josh were opening the door of the dry cleaners when they saw Perry, followed by Sophie, race across the street and into the bookshop. Get the store open, Nick snapped as he reached under his t-shirt. From a simple square cloth bag dangling around his neck, he produced what looked like a small book bound in copper-colored metal. Josh slammed back the bolts and tugged open the door, and Nick raced out, quickly thumbing through the rough-edged pages as he ran, looking for something. Josh caught a brief glimpse of ornate writing and geometric patterns on the thick yellow pages as he followed Nick back into the bookshop. Nick and Josh arrived in time to see the golem touch Perry and explode. Fine, gritty power filled the air, and the heavy black overcoat crumpled to the floor. For a moment, a miniature whirlwind spun there, churning up the dust. Then it curled away. But Nick and Josh's entry diverted Perry's attention. She had half turned, and in that instant, Dee drew his left arm across his eyes, hurled a tiny crystal ball into the floor. It was as if the sun had exploded in the room. The light was incredible, blinding and harsh. It blanketed the room in its ghastly flare, and with the light came the smell. The stink of burning hair and overcooked food, smoldering leaves, scorched metal mingled with the acrid fumes of diesel. Josh caught a glimpse of his sister just as Dee tossed the crystal. He was partially shielded by Nick and Perry, both of whom were battered to the floor by the light. Josh's vision became a kaleidoscope of black and white still images as the light seared the rods and cones at the back of his eyes. He saw Nick drop the metal-bound book onto the floor, saw two black-clad shapes surrounded Perry, and vaguely heard her scream. Saw Dee snatch the book with a grunt of triumph while Nick groped blindly on the floor. "You lose, Nicholas," Dee hissed, "as you have always lost. Now I get to take those things most precious to you, your beloved Purnell, and your book." Josh was moving even before he was aware of it. He launched himself at Dee, catching the small man by surprise. Although only 15, Josh was tall for his age, and heavy. He was big enough to be a linebacker, and the youngest on his football team. He knocked Dee to the ground, sending the book spinning out of his grasp. Josh felt the heavy metal cover beneath his fingertips and caught it, just as he was lifted straight off the floor and tossed into a corner. He landed on a pile of books that cushioned his fall. Black spots and darts of rainbow light moved across his eyes every time he blinked. Dee's gray shape loomed over Josh. Then his gloved hand reached down for the book. "Mine, I think." Josh's grip tightened, but Dee simply wrenched the book from his hands. "You leave my brother alone." Sophie Newman brought the broom down 5 times on Dee's back, once for every word. Dee barely glanced at her. Clutching the book in one gloved hand, he caught the broom in the other and muttered a single word, and it immediately withered and turned to ragged, pulpy splinters in Sophie's hands. "You're lucky I'm in a good humor today," he whispered, "else I'd do the same to you." Then Dee and his 2 remaining golems swept out of the devastated bookshop, carrying Perry Fleming between them, and slammed the closed door. There was a long moment of silence. Then the last remaining undisturbed shelf of books clattered to the floor. All right, that is Chapter 3. So if you stay tuned, I'll be right back with you with Chapter 4.